Winzar, the CEDA Chief Economist. CEDA, of course, is Committee for Economic Development Australia. And Cassandra Goldie from ACOS, the Australian Council of Social Services. The two Casses, great to have you with us.
Good evening, David.
Let's start with some of the support that's been offered by the government for the most vulnerable. And perhaps first to you, Cassandra Winzar, deeming rates for financial investments. That's going to be frozen for another year. Can you just explain this for us in layman's terms, what it means?
Yeah, so look, this is the rates that the government uses to look at the payments for pensioners. So around what sort of rates they deem are reasonable on the financial returns that they should be getting. So by freezing that, they're increasing the eligibility around pension payments, which will help some pensioners who are struggling to get full or more pension payments at the moment.
Cassandra Goldie, what will this mean for particularly aged pensioners and other vulnerable Australians?
Well, look, it will help people for whom this is designed to benefit. Bear in mind, of course, we are talking there about people who do at least have the fortune of having some assets behind them in order for them to be invested, in order for them to be eligible for even the benefits of this measure. I mean, for us, David, we're most alarmed by the gaping hole at the heart of the budget, which is the lack of action to fix the adequacy of job seeker and youth allowance, and those payments are much lower, $172 per week lower than the pension rate, and we're really alarmed. We did not see any movement on that front tonight.
There was an increase in job seeker for those with the capacity to work. How far does that go?
Well, let's be clear, that will help at most 4,700 people out of over 1.1 million people on this payment. We're talking about people whose partial capacity or disability is so significant that they've been assessed that they could only work at most 14 hours per week. So they're probably people who actually should be on the disability support pension, which again is $172 per week, more than the job seeker payment. That is not the solution to the problem that leading experts all over the country had called for to be fixed in this budget. Bearing in mind we're giving $26 billion in tax cuts, aren't we, from 1 July?
To everyone.
Well, not to everyone, actually. We will only be giving that to people who are incomes are high enough to be, to get the benefits of it. And of course, that will include people on the very highest incomes in the country who'll be getting $4,500 per year extra at the same time as we did not fix job seeker, which is egregiously low.
That's not, Cassandra Winzar, the only sort of broad support that's been offered. There's also this energy bill relief that goes to every Australian. I mean, last year it was very targeted. This year, you could be the richest person in Australia. You're still going to get this rebate. Is that good policy?
Look, I think it might be welcomed by many households, but I was quite disappointed to see that this wasn't targeted. So that means we've got these broad electricity rebates. As Cassandra said, we also have these broad tax cuts. So there's a lot of people that are getting cost of living support that probably don't need it or don't need it that much, instead of addressing targeted support to those on the lowest incomes. So it's probably going to increase inflation, and at the same time, it's not going to help those that need it most.
So you think it will increase inflation? Because that's a very different line from the Treasurer and the Finance Minister.
Yes, look, I think it will. When we combine it with the tax cuts, when we look at how broad-based it is, and we look at all the other spending in this budget, I do think we're looking at a budget that is going to stoke inflation, both in the shorter term, but also longer term when we look at a lot of the spending here.
Cass Goldie, sorry to cut you off.
I was just going to say that Cassandra Winzar was one of the leading economists who signed the letter to the Prime Minister, 15 of the economists urging the action to fix the adequacy of job seeker, and the Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee, that was its first recommendation, priority, and the findings there was that would not have anything other than a negligible effect on inflation. Targeting is everything. And when we've got a government that said it was carefully balancing the priorities for us to not focus most on people with the least, in our view, was really cruelly to deny people the help that they desperately needed.
The government's response is, everyone's hurting. Middle Australians are hurting. People with mortgages that are lucky enough to have mortgages, they've seen interest rates go up, what are we up to, 11 times in the last little bit. Is that Is that something that lands okay with you?
The best thing that government can do to help those households is to get inflation under control and to get us to an environment where we might see interest rate cuts. All we're doing at the moment is prolonging pain for those households while also not helping out those who really need it at the moment. So it's just going to make things more difficult for longer.
Services Australia is getting an extra $1.8 billion over 4 years. Goldie, what's that going to go to?
Look, we really welcome that. Partly it will be about frontline services. It will also be about systems upgrades and technology solutions that are desperately needed. This is a huge service system that's crucial for everybody in Australia. It's very crucial for people who are most vulnerable, who rely on that for their basic income, and so we do certainly welcome that. And we've got some additional dollars associated with things like financial counselling and emergency relief. But it's not on the scale that's needed here when it comes to the kind of cost of living relief that was needed for people most directly affected, I think.
Would you agree with that, Cass Winzar?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think it will help in some degree, but it's pretty small in the scheme of things and the challenges that we're facing for that sector.
What about the macro elements of this budget? I mean, you've talked about what you say is the inflationary elements of it. There is a surplus that's forecast for this year, $9 billion. That's the second in a row, although we haven't got there yet, but that's what's forecast. That hasn't happened for almost 20 years. Do you give the government any credit for that?
Look, there's a little bit of credit there, but it's mainly being driven by low unemployment rates, which is increasing the income tax take, corporate profits, particularly in the resources sector. So a lot of things that are really outside the government's control is what's driving that surplus. And the surplus isn't going to last very long. So we're expecting next year a $28 billion deficit and a $43 billion deficit the year after, and deficits for years to come. So this budget does nothing to address the structural deficit that we have. And that's a really difficult challenge for us. And we need to look at both the spending side of the equation, so where is it that we can reduce spending, and also have a real conversation around tax reform. And where we can increase. Yeah, and there's just no action on it. The stage 3 tax cuts are not tax reform. So we really have to have a real conversation about tax reform and how we're going to make sure that we can deliver the services Australians want into the future.
Cass Goldie.
Look, the Reserve Bank Governor was very clear that not everybody is being affected by the cost of living crisis in the same way. And clearly there are people who are doing extremely well out of the current economy and have a lot behind them. And that's why we were so serious also about the discipline that we felt was needed in this budget to only target the help to people who really needed it. And the big picture is exactly as Cassandra has described, that we have to make sure that our spending is high value, helping people who need the help the most. And then on the revenue side, remembering that we are one of the 9th lowest when it comes to our overall public revenues available for all of these critical services that people so heavily rely upon. And we would have liked to have seen the action on property investment taxes. We've got a housing crisis. We would have liked to have seen the action on fossil fuel tax breaks and rebates. We've got a climate crisis. We've got a big package, of course, with Made in Australia. Yes, we want to see the big energy system transition, but we didn't get the big investments that we needed for households retrofitting their homes. So at the moment, it's very much a private market solution, isn't it? If you're wealthy, you've got your own home, you can retrofit, you've got all your solar panels, etc., some subsidies along the way. But if you're a low and modest income earner, you're not getting that. And so this is about, as we say, the discipline overall of the productive investment in these big system changes. But to do that, you have to be prepared to go to tax reform as well.
We don't have long left, just about a minute, so 30 seconds each. Interested in your view of this $14 billion save on the NDIS. It's by far the biggest saving, but we know that, there was general consensus that the spiralling costs of the NDIS needed to be reined in. Cass Winzar first.
Yeah, look, the NDIS needs to be dealt with, or we're going to have a massive spending problem on our hands. So it is good to see that there's savings measures in there. A little bit concerned about whether they're actually going to be able to achieve them and how they're actually going to be able to reduce that demand for services. So it is going to be an ongoing challenge for the budget, but we do need to rein in NDIS spending or we won't be able to deliver quality services.
Cass, Goldie.
Look, I think for people with a disability, they'll be very worried again tonight. Will this really mean for their access to critical services so essential for their quality of life? People with a disability will be the first to say that they want to deal with the fraud and the gouging that may be going on within the NDIS. They're the first people to say that. And so for us, it'll all be about who is in control of the decisions to really make sure the NDIS is the high-value service that it should be.
The main thing the government wants to stress there is that the NDIS will still be growing at around, they hope, about 8% rather than 15%. So they're very much clear that it's not a cut. Cass, Goldie, Cass Winzar, great to have you with us. Thank you so
Thanks,
much
David.
for
Thank
that.
you.
And thank you very much for listening to our special budget coverage. Sabra Lane, of course, will have more analysis tomorrow morning for AM. But for now, that's it from us.